I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Alexander, let's talk about OPEC. Let's talk about Russia and Saudi Arabia. Many people, when they hear the word OPEC, they instantly think of Saudi Arabia as the big player, but that is not the case anymore. It looks like Russia is now the dominant player when it comes to oil markets, when it comes to OPEC, and they have hammered out a deal which proves that point. Alexander, get into what has happened
Yeah.
between Russia and Saudi Arabia.
Yes, I mean this is I think an absolutely huge revolution in the world economic system, and ultimately it will have great geopolitical consequences. It's not been properly analyzed or understood. But if we go back to the world as it was before 2016, not so very long ago, the dominant swing producer in the oil market was Saudi Arabia. It was the Saudis who decided whether whether at times of an oil production oversupply, they would cut back on oil so as to support the market, or if there was insufficient oil circling and oil prices were rising too high, the Saudis would increase production and try and stabilize prices. So Saudi Arabia was the swing producer, and OPEC was totally dominated by Saudi Arabia. Now, what has happened over the last few years is that Russia has established itself as a major producer of oil, produces as much oil now in any 1 year as Saudi Arabia does. And another country has also re-established itself as a major producer of oil, which is the United States, which has benefited from the shale revolution. And the Saudis found in between 2014, when the oil price crashed, and 2016, that they couldn't control the oil price anymore. And at the same time, they also discovered that they couldn't survive for an extended period a very low oil price, because their economy is not diversified. Their political system is such that it can only function when there is large amounts of money pouring into Saudi Arabia that they can then recycle to buy potential opposition off. So what happened in 2016 is that the Saudis, knowing that the United States will never agree to oil production cuts, there's no possibility of the US oil industry ever doing that in terms of US domestic production, they were forced to turn to the other big oil producer, which is Russia. And here there is a major difference, because Russia, unlike Saudi Arabia, has, as we have often discussed on our programs, a very diversified economy. Though it benefits in some ways from a high oil price, in reality, and contrary to what people like John McCain and Barack Obama often say, it actually produces a range of many other things. It has a significant industrial base, a large industrial base, a very large agricultural base, a very advanced scientific and technological base too. So the Russians don't depend to the extent that the Saudis do on a high oil price. And that means that when the Saudis have to come to the Russians and ask the Russians to agree to production cuts to achieve a higher oil price, it is the Russians who have the superior bargaining position. Now, what has been happening over the last couple of months is that the previous oil production cut agreement between Russia and Saudi Arabia was running out. There are signs that the world economy is slipping towards recession. Oil prices were starting to fall. The Saudis were becoming increasingly concerned. They came to the Russians to ask for an extension of the oil production cut agreement. the Russians, as they always do, played a very tough negotiating game, but they have eventually agreed to extend the oil production cut agreement for 9 months. By doing so, the Russians have established effective leadership in the oil market. And now, as the key swing producer, which Saudi Arabia has to go to, it is the Russians, not the Saudis, who are able to dictate the oil price at any one particular point in time.
How does this factor into geopolitics now, Alexander? Because, you have obviously the United States worked a lot with Saudi Arabia, regardless of what atrocities Saudi Arabia would commit. There was always that oil factor, and the United States would work with Saudi Arabia because of that relationship with the oil price. And now you have Russia inserting itself. Russia has good diplomatic ties with Saudi Arabia. Once again, regardless of the atrocities that Saudi Arabia commits, Russia does keep good relations with Saudi Arabia. Obviously, it's no surprise if anyone has been, watching the news or reading the news the last 8 years that the U.S. and Russian relations have been on a downturn. Maybe things are looking a little bit better given the relationship between Trump and Putin. But how does this factor into a geopolitical framework?
It has immense implications. Now, let's start first of all with the situation in the Middle East and in the Persian Gulf. I mean, what it means is, what this kind of situation means is that the Russians now, to a very great extent, hold Saudi Arabia's existence and its future in their hands, because the Saudis have realized that without a high oil price, the Saudi kingdom risks becoming politically unstable. So that means that Saudi Arabia, when it considers its foreign adventures, either against Yemen or against Iran, or in places like Sudan or Syria, Afghanistan or Syria especially, it now has to take Russian concerns into account in ways which it never did before. Now, I know people will say that if there's a war between the United States and Iran, that will push up oil prices to astronomical levels, and the Saudis will be the beneficiaries. They won't be the beneficiaries if their own oil facilities are targeted. So they have to balance out all of these things. They have to consider the risks of a conflict with Iran and the dangers of that conflict going wrong. And at the same time now, in ways they never did before, they have to worry about the Russians. And the Russians conduct diplomacy. Now, that doesn't mean doing what the United States does, which is clambering upon a soapbox and preaching at people and telling them, how they should behave and how inappropriate it is to behave. The Russians never do that. They didn't do that over Yemen, the Yemen war, even though they opposed it. They didn't do it over the Khashoggi affair. But in private, they will be telling the Saudis, look, we don't want to see conflict in Syria. We don't want to see conflict in Yemen. We don't want to see conflict in the Gulf. And the Saudis have to listen. So that is already a major geopolitical shift because of the huge importance that Saudi Arabia has in determining the development of conflicts, the evolution of conflicts in the Middle East and throughout the Muslim world. Notice that since the Saudis and the Russians have been working together on oil production cuts, the jihadi insurgency that used to exist in Russia's Caucasus region, for example, has ended. The Russians have obviously told the Saudis that is unacceptable. You want to work with us. We cannot tolerate continued support from Saudi Arabia for jihadi groups in the Caucasus, in Chechnya, and such places. And the result is that the aid to the jihadis in those places has been switched off, and that conflict has effectively ended, a fact which I barely ever see mentioned nowadays. Now, there is another factor which is equally important, which is the position of the dollar. Now, I've discussed this many times, but one of the things which underpins the reserve currency status of the dollar is that as a result of a series of agreements the United States made with Saudi Arabia in the 1970s, oil is priced in dollars. That means that countries all around the world, when they buy oil, have to have a certain amount of hard currency convertible into dollars in order to buy oil. And since oil is the world's most widely traded commodity, without which no industrial economy can function, that secures the dollar's position as the world's reserve currency. Now, in a situation where Saudi Arabia is coming closer to Russia and ultimately to China, because China is now a major buyer of Saudi oil, and is inevitably having to work with the Russians rather than with the US in order to stabilize the oil market, that must over time weaken Saudi Arabia's commitment to the dollar as the currency in which their oil is traded. And if and when they decide that they will no longer require payment in dollars for their oil, that will be the moment when the reserve currency status of the dollar faces an existential threat.
Won't that be the moment that we have all-out war, Alexander? Because, I mean,
Yeah.
I can't see the United States just sitting by and seeing this unfold at all. I mean, they've gone to war for much less, i.e. Iraq, Libya. Even many people say the whole thing going on with Iran is also part of the petrodollar status. So, I mean, this actually sounds, hearing you describe it actually worries me.
Yeah, well, I understand why, because, of course, Saudi Arabia is also a very dangerous country in many respects. If the United States goes to war with Saudi Arabia or with various people in Saudi Arabia...
It sounds crazy to just hear you say that.
Say that. I know, it sounds absolutely crazy. Then, as you rightly say, if that ever happens, then people in the United States will have taken complete leave of their senses, because an even more rapid way of destroying the position of the dollar is to get the United States stuck in a conflict in the Arabian Peninsula. I mean, that is the stuff of madness, frankly. And the United States would suffer terribly if it ever went down that route. What I think the US will do, rather than actually go to war, is it will use all the levers of influence it still has within Saudi Arabia, which are very considerable, to put off this evil day. And if any Saudi king or monarch or crown prince or whatever commits himself to shifting away from the dollar, I think the United States will try to use its extensive assets within the Saudi political system, the Saudi hierarchy, to try to remove that person. So what that, however, would risk doing would be destabilizing Saudi Arabia entirely. So it'd be a very high stakes game. But as I said, we don't know where all this is going to go or how soon it's going to go. But the direction now is clear. It is to move away from a position where the dollar is the dominant currency in the oil trade. I mean, bear in mind that before 1973, it wasn't the dollar, it was gold. And we see central banks around the world stocking up very heavily in gold.
Is that where we're moving towards? Because it sounds to me like what happened between Russia and Saudi Arabia seemed to be a very significant nail in the petrodollar's coffin.
Yes, yes.
I mean,
yes.
like you said, I think there's a long way to go, but we are seeing a lot of countries, including Russia, buy a lot of gold. Is that the goal here, to get back to the gold standard?
I'm starting to think so. I have to say I've been skeptical of that theory for a while, and because there are great problems operating a gold standard. To be very clear about this, I mean, we're not talking about a straightforward financial system if it's based on gold at all. And I think that the Russians, who were the leaders in this, it was they who basically started stocking up on gold, didn't do it with that intention originally. I think they were stocking up on gold because they were concerned that they might be sanctioned and that their treasury holdings might be frozen. And so they started buying gold as a kind of hedge. But I think what has now been happening is because of the evolution in the economic system, the world economic system and the world trade system, and the erosion of confidence in the US as it is trying to weaponize the dollar in order to pursue its foreign policy objectives. And as you also see, as I said, the Saudis become increasingly dependent on the Russians, both for their economic well-being and for their long-term political survival. I think you're starting to see more and more people in more and more places perhaps saying to themselves, well, the dollar is not going to be the reserve currency in which oil is traded, in other words, the petrodollar, for very much longer. What are we going to replace it with? Perhaps it will have to be gold, because gold is what oil used to trade in before the petrodollar was established.
Okay, it's just a fascinating turn of events. It's not really getting reported much either.
No,
maybe that's on purpose too. I'm not sure.
I think it is. I mean, bear in mind that this is a very sensitive issue in the US amongst US policymakers. I think that they don't like to talk about the reserve currency status of the dollar being challenged. But we know that it is always there at the back of their minds. I remember a very, very interesting interview that John Kerry, when he was Secretary of State, gave, in which he said that one of the reasons why Barack Obama agreed to the JCPOA with Iran was because he was worried that if the United States persisted with its sanctions policy against Iran at a time when other countries seemed intent on breaking it, if the United States then imposed penalties on those countries which broke those sanctions, that could accelerate a shift away from the dollar. And so that was a consideration, apparently, that the Obama administration had. And I'm sure it's always there at the back of many people's minds today.
Yeah, nothing more important than the petrodollar for the United States, that's for sure.
Well, indeed.
All right, Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran, thank you very much. Guys, if you like this video, click on that subscribe button down below. Click on the notifications bell to make sure you get notifications every time we push out a new video. Please donate to us on PayPal, Patreon, and now Subscribestar as well. The links are in the description box down below. You can also get an audio copy of this video. Follow us on SoundCloud and on iTunes. The links are also in the description box down below. You can also follow us on Instagram, the Duran_com. And you can go to the Duran shop and you could buy a t-shirt, a v-neck, a polo shirt, a long sleeve shirt, tank tops, stickers, magic mugs.
Like
what
these?
else can people get? A gray polo with an embroidered black eagle on it.
Like this one here.
That's right.
Can I just say, I mean, we've had very changeable temperatures recently. So this is the perfect polo shirt to wear when it gets very hot in London, as it did a few days ago, and cooler, as it's also got. And it's incredibly stylish and very elegant to wear. I was at a social event in Ham House, which is a stately home near London, and I was wearing this, and I had my dogs there also, by the way, and it was the perfect thing to wear there. So you see, it's actually very comfortable to wear both at work and at the same time, even in the best social events. And the reason is because it's 100% cotton, it's beautifully cut, it fits wonderfully well, it's very comfortable, and it's so stylish. And you can also tell it's stylish, not just by feeling the material, which is always a good guide, by the way, to knowing when you're wearing a quality thing, but also how well the dye is. I mean, it's a really good, elegant.
And
So this is a wonderful polo shirt.
can I let people know finish off what you said? It's a wonderful,
Wonderful polo
Yeah,
shirt
'cause-
for social events, glittering social events, and for casual wear.
because I just want to let all our viewers know that before we did the show, you put in an order. You like the shirt so much, you put in an order for the blue polo shirt and the red polo shirt, correct?
Indeed, so. I mean, I am enlarging my repertoire of polo shirts because, as I said, they're proving to be so useful. I mean, I'm finding that, as I said, I can wear them in all sorts of places. And by the way, I have a reputation for being a very well-dressed man. So it's important to me that people see me looking good. And at the same time, I don't want to sit, turning up wearing the same thing too many times. So now I'm going to have a nice repertoire of really great shirts to wear in many places. As I said, my wife adores me in them, and she's the most critical judge. And I think married men will know what I mean by that. So that's why I am carefully choosing the polo shirts I'm going to wear, and I'm buying them from the Duran shop because they are so extraordinarily good.
And I will also let our users know that your wife also put in a nice order. And
Yes.
you also put in an order for another magic mug,
Oh,
which
indeed.
is the Alpha Spetsnaz mug,
Yeah.
the Special Forces mug, which is a new one we have, which is really
Absolutely.
cool. And you also
Absolutely.
have two magic mugs with you right there.
Absolutely. I have them here. This is, as I said, this is my favorite mug, which is, well, it's my mug because it's got our own logo on it, which is the double-headed eagle, which, as I said, points both to the east and the west. And as I say, it's got a beautiful porcelain body, and it's immensely capacious, and it's perfect for drinking tea like this tea. This is, as I said, red robe tea. People who've seen others of our videos might be familiar with this tea. This is one of the most premium teas you can get. So you're going to drink a tea like that, you have to drink it from a good mug, and this is an exceptional one. And this is the coat of arms of Moscow, and the one I'm going with as is St. George slaying the dragon of fake news, which is what we do. And since we're also incisive and brilliant in our analysis, we will operate on the principle that is used by special forces, which is who dares wins. And we dare every time when we do these programs. So what better mug can I order than one with Alpha, the elite Russian special forces unit, their logo on it. So this is a mug I am very much looking forward to. It will keep me refreshed, and it will keep giving me that edge which we have on the Duran, which makes us so superior to all other news analysis channels.
Alexander, let me ask you a quick question now that we finished our promo of our products. What was the reaction in the UK to the famous, which is now going to be a famous photo between May and Putin? I'm sure everyone that's watching this video knows which photo we're talking about,
Oh,
the G20.
absolutely.
What was the reaction in the UK with what went down?
Well, I think a lot of people couldn't understand why Theresa May was meeting with Putin at all. And if you read some of the articles, there was a lot of, surprise and annoyance that she was meeting. But, Theresa May, I have to say this. I mean, she looks this frozen, icy, angry, annoyed person. And that's what she's like most of the time. So I think in that respect, I don't think it was that different. And I mean, you have Theresa May, as I said, a lot of people in Britain called her the Maybot, as in, the May robot, the Maybot. And she's meeting this lively, cheerful, humorous, intelligent, witty man who is Vladimir Putin. I mean, it's two polar opposites. And as I said, that photograph captures the difference between the two of them so vividly. I mean, she's, as I said, looks cross and angry and frozen and very unhappy, I think, about having to meet him at all, which, as I said, reflects the views of many people here. And as I said, Putin, as always, looks himself cheerful and cheeky, as he always does. I should say an important thing to understand about this meeting, which I think we touched on one of our programs, is that it was the British who asked for it. So the British are starting to sense how isolated they're becoming. And that was somehow a decision that must have been made within the sort of deeper recesses of the British political system, that the British Prime Minister, has to start this meeting with the Russians, with Putin, in order to break the ice and to make it easier for the next Prime Minister, in other words, Boris Johnson, to build on that. And very much against her wishes, Theresa May found herself pushed into that position.
A fitting end to Theresa May's term as Prime Minister, isn't it? That photo captures it all.
Absolutely.
And at the hands of Vladimir Putin, who she spent, just time and time again demonizing. Just a fitting end.
Absolutely. I mean, here we are. Theresa May becomes Prime Minister with this vast amount of, attention when she was given. I mean, she was spoken about as, the new Margaret Thatcher, the great leader and all of this. And she failed completely. And the leader she most criticized was Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir Putin was the last leader she meets, and meets in a meeting she didn't want to go to. Now, I mean, that tells you so much about the realities of the world. But for Putin, it must have been sweet revenge indeed.
All right. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Until next time, everybody, take care.